An advisory before we begin. This channel is not intended for kids and I don't censor myself, so if you're a minor, I will invite you to sample some of the many wonderful channels that provide content to our younger viewers, and you can see yourself to the door forthwith. So let's talk about Stan and Ollie, 2019's loving tribute to arguably the greatest comedy duo in all of cinema, Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy. There are few more enduring characters in comedy, and what I find most interesting is that when talking about classic films and classic comedy, Laurel and Hardy are the two performers, along with the Three Stooges, that are most well known by the younger generation of today. I've often wondered why Laurel and Hardy and the Stooges consistently, but not the Marx Brothers, not Abbott and Costello, not Harold Lloyd, not even our gang, known to we viewers of after-school television and Saturday mornings as the Little Rascals. In the case of the Rascals, more young people have seen the 1994 film remake than have come across the reruns of the original 80 Hal Roach shorts. That's to be expected, I guess. In this world suddenly riddled with political correctness, these episodes are a hard sell these days. They are not racially sensitive by any means, and there is no point in mounting any kind of a defense citing the product of its time argument, which is a shame because a part of history is being lost. I always appreciate an approach such as Whoopi Goldberg used when introducing the Looney Tunes cartoon collection.
However, the Looney Tunes and their irreverent brand of humor are products of their time. Unfortunately, at that time, racial and ethnic differences were caricatured in ways that may have embarrassed and even hurt people of color, women, and ethnic groups. Now, nobody intended it, but that's what happened. Now, some of the cartoons here reflect some of the prejudices that were commonplace in American society, especially when it came to the treatment of racial and ethnic minorities. Now, these jokes were wrong then, and they are wrong today. But removing these inexcusable images and jokes from this collection would be the same as saying they never existed. So they are presented here to accurately reflect a part of our history that cannot and should not be ignored.
Amen to that. To my mind, that is the way to find that middle ground of sorts with the obvious insensitivities found in many of these vintage productions. I did think Whoopi was being quite generous when she offered that nobody intended it. While I think you'd be hard-pressed to assign actual malice, there are plenty of examples in films from the Three Stooges, Our Gang, and Laurel and Hardy where they do go for a laugh at the expense of marginalized groups and minorities. But that fact doesn't just cancel the historical relevance of these films and creations. I am not a proponent of denying this education to any generation. All of our films, right or wrong if you want to use such definitive proclamations, deserve to be seen and digested if so desired. This is not a unique argument, nor is it a one-sided argument. Vociferous disagreement surely abounds. My position has been and always will be, we must embrace our history, warts and all, calling out the fails and celebrating the triumphs. Okay, off my soapbox then. My exposure to Laurel and Hardy came in the form of weekend matinees on television and oftentimes on TV Ontario's Magic Shadows program, hosted by the excellent Elwie Yost for many years. Elwie delighted in running classic films over the course of a few evenings, some of which included Laurel and Hardy. When I was growing up, I would always take great interest in the movies my father, who is an Italian immigrant, would watch. A staple of his was Clint Eastwood, particularly the spaghetti westerns of Sergio Leone. Additionally, he would howl with laughter watching Looney Tunes, and he would always pay loving attention to Laurel and Hardy. My father has never been a huge movie buff, but these, in addition to various poliziotteschi, which are Italy's version of the crime action film, and Steve McQueen and Spencer Tracy movies, were the vehicles for the film narratives that he most enjoyed. Which was interesting for me because it provided me with an early cinematic education, shocking at times, but which also left me wondering what it was about these films that were so appealing to him. And the reality is, in many cases, it's about the simplicity of the message conveyed. It's about the series of interconnected actions and reactions, twists and turns that transcend language altogether. Now think about that for a moment. You can take any Sergio Leone Western, and you'll notice two things pretty much immediately. First, there's very little dialogue overall, and related to that, you can watch the entire movie with the sound off and still understand what is going on. I don't recommend that at all, by the way, for either spaghetti westerns, Looney Tunes, or Laurel and Hardy pictures, or you'll end up missing the amazing music that drives the narrative forward. What I take away from the anecdotes about my father is that there is a universality to some forms of cinema, a narrative, both spoken and unspoken, that reaches across borders, cultures, and age groups. I think this is a true statement that can be made about cinema in general, but it particularly applies to these specific examples I've given. Proof of that universality is the sheer longevity of the laughs, the action, the tears. It's a key reason why certain shows seem dated while others endure. A prime rule of writing, in my opinion, is let the times inform your writing, but never write for your times. Ooh, I like that. Consider it copyrighted. It's true, though, timelessness is about finding what connects to the human condition, not a series of unending pop culture references that are often dated 5 minutes after they're uttered. That's why the first 8 seasons of The Simpsons is still watchable and funny as fuck, while many other shows just don't hold up anymore. I personally find it pointless to watch the first few seasons of Family Guy now, as I just don't laugh anymore the way I did when I first watched them. Seinfeld is still amazingly funny, though some jokes are a bit cringe these days when they fail to land due to obscure references. Then again, that's kind of the point of this whole channel, so... But again, that universality of image, story, identification, pathos, humor, all of it, makes certain stories we watch more appealing and timeless than we can often comprehend at the time of first viewing. So with this in mind, back to the boys. They first came together in 1921 for the silent film The Lucky Dog, after solo careers that seemed to lead them to that serendipitous coupling. Though they wouldn't be officially billed as a team until 1927's The Second 100 Years, Stan and Babe, as Oliver Hardy was nicknamed, were a team, though sometimes on and off, until their last film, Atoll K, also known as Utopia or Robinson Crusoe Land in 1951. For those of you who haven't had the opportunity to watch Atoll K, it's a bit tough to sit through, similar to watching some of the last few films from the Three Stooges. After 30 years of making movies together, now tired and ill, Laurel and Hardy deserved a far better swan song. But even so, the goodwill earned from 3 decades of laughter still makes it a fascinating and nostalgic watch for any fan. A substantial portion, over 30% of Laurel and Hardy's output was from the silent era, a total of 35 films in their catalog of about 108. It wasn't until Unaccustomed as We Are in 1929 that the duo finally spoke. I find I am not as big a fan of their silence as I am their talkies. While some of their best work is in the silent realm, such as 1927's The Battle of the Century and From Soup to Nuts from 1928 to name only 2, I've always felt, convinced myself perhaps, that the boys were at their best when they made use of the whole package. Hearing them speak, I felt, allowed them maximum comedic impact. I admit that as my exposure to cinema grew and evolved, I eventually found I was of a mixed mind on this topic. You see, originally my thinking was mostly around the idea that the silent era was an age of necessity. There was no other workable option in a time without proper and portable audio recording equipment and a way to synchronize the video with the audio reliably and effectively. In that cage of limitations, they did some great things with what they had. Visually, of course, through inspired set design, effective lighting, and use of shadow and perspective, I'm reminded of the work of the German expressionist filmmakers such as Robert Wiener's amazing The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari from 1920. This was also true of Fritz Lang's masterpiece Metropolis from 1927, which also carried with it a haunting musical score. For silent films, it was the live musical soundtrack that necessarily became the audio anchor, fulfilling the hunger of the movie-going audience. It was fascinating to see many of those movie soundtracks re-recorded and performed over the years, or even reinvented as Giorgio Moroder did for Metropolis and as Typo Negative did for F.W. Murnau's 1922 film Nosferatu. But speech was conspicuously missing, especially in movies where you could see the characters speaking. Yes, you had the intertitles, which were the dialogue cards from the age before subtitles, but without speech, the movies would somehow always seem incomplete in a way. But then I saw City Lights, and I realized I needed to think about this a little bit harder. In my opinion, Charlie Chaplin's best film, City Lights was released in 1931 in an era when talkies were now the standard. Yet Chaplin chose silence for this film. And frankly, it's no wonder why. Chaplin always felt that his character the tramp would lose his magic if he were made to speak. And so, Chaplin resisted the use of sound to tell this, his most emotionally moving story. He resisted yet again when he made the phenomenal Modern Times in 1936, though this time, he relented ever so slightly. He allowed the tramp to sing one song, a tour de force of gibberish that's in itself worth the price of admission. In Charlie Chaplin's next film, 1940's The Great Dictator, a full talkie, the character of the tramp was no more. Though the barber and the dictator of the film somewhat resembled the tramp, Chaplin knew that his creation was a product of the silent era, and it was in the silent era that he must forever remain. After Modern Times, the tramp was never to be seen again. Interesting aside here, Stan Laurel was actually Charlie Chaplin's understudy for a time when Stan went by his real name of Arthur Stanley Jefferson. You can catch a fleeting glimpse of Stan from that time as played by Matthew Caudill in Richard Attenborough's 1992 film Chaplin, starring Robert Downey Jr. That movie is severely flawed, however it is also severely underrated, and in my opinion one of Robert Downey Jr.'s best performances. Give it a watch if you haven't already. The ultimate tribute to silent films was arguably paid by none other than Mel Brooks in his silent movie from 1976, if you can believe that. Again, if you haven't seen it, watch it. There is only one spoken word in this entire movie, and it is uttered in a very unexpected fashion. I won't ruin it for you, but it is the most clever joke of the film by far, and probably one of the best jokes ever. When it comes to Laurel and Hardy, though, I stand by my assertion. Their best work involves talking. The accents and the frustration can only come out of their vocal talents. Stan's crying, Oliver's whining, and his perfect inflection when he begs,
"Why don't you do something to help me?"
No cue card could convey the urgency of that sentiment more perfectly. I didn't count compilations when I mentioned Laurel and Hardy's 108 films, nor did I count the reshoots in different languages. Now, this is fascinating. Knowing that international markets were a valuable source of revenue for the studio, there was an effort to cultivate a connection with that audience by releasing some of the films in multiple languages, such as French, Italian, Spanish, and German. Since neither actor spoke these languages, the translated script was actually written phonetically on cue cards for them to read. They would do a scene in English, then do another take in French, then another in Spanish, and so on, all while reading the foreign lines off of the cue cards. Those scenes would then be edited together and released as a completely independent film. It's very surreal to watch 1930s Below Zero in English and then watch it again in Spanish because it's just a little different. Unlike today where the same footage is simply overdubbed or subtitled, these are actual performances in the language slightly different than the originals. It's kind of trippy, actually.
Imagine being in a predicament of that kind. Must be very embarrassing.
Very.
Garçon,
Yes, gentlemen.
our check, please.
Oh, certainly, sir. Thank you very much.
Oh, now, wait a minute. I'd feel a lot better if I paid this check.
I should say not. You're our guest. Our honored guest.
I know, but
Absolutely.
If I...
No, 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 no.
Okay.
No quisiera verme en ese predicamento. ¡Qué vergüenza!
Ah, una vergüenza terrible, ¿cómo no?
Verdugo, señor.
La cuenta.
Oh, con muchísimo gusto, señor. Muchas gracias, señores.
Déjeme usted pagar la cuenta, por favor.
Usted es mi invitado. Mi invitado de honor.
No, de veras, déjeme usted pagarla.
No, 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 no. No.
While I didn't count those duplicate films, I am counting cameos. Some of you may remember a crossover where the boys, in their personas from their 1930 film Bratz, appeared in the 1933 Our Gang short Wild Poses, where a long-suffering photographer is trying to take Spanky McFarlane's picture with the expected results. That short is hilarious, and it isn't the only crossover between Our Gang and Laurel and Hardy, but we'll talk more about that in a bit. Stan Ollie is a film that pays loving tribute by focusing in on a very specific point in the duo's career. After initially showing events around the making of Way Out West in 1937, the film then shifts forward to 1953, where the boys are embarking on a music hall tour of the UK. It is truly a fascinating film on so many levels. Very little exists in the way of interviews and candid footage as we now expect to be given in our content-starved, media-driven world, and so the film provides a fascinating look behind the scenes, if you will, of what these two were like when off camera. I've read the biographies, of course, I am a proud owner of John McCabe's famous book, Mr. Laurel and Mr. Hardy, which really is the key source of information about not only the duo's work, but also about their relationship. While an old book now, it still has much to appeal to anyone with an interest in the boys, and does much more justice to who they were than I can do here. I highly recommend that you give it a read. The film itself is bittersweet, and there is much to admire for fans and newcomers alike. I would say, however, that in order to truly appreciate the film as intended, it's important to watch some of Laurel and Hardy's work prior to watching Stan and Ollie. Only then can you truly appreciate what has been done here. And at a minimum, I'd urge you to watch Way Out West and County Hospital, since both play into the narrative of Stan and Ollie. Moreover, they provide a one-to-one comparison that will leave you in awe. It is absolutely astounding to see Steve Coogan and John C. Reilly bring these characters to life in a way that is truly uncanny. Fantastic performances from the two leads, a very simple and tight script, and a focus on the dynamics and interaction of two old friends allows this film to be much more than the sum of its parts. Not to say it's perfect. I felt that a balanced cross-cutting from the boys in the 1930s to 1953 would have provided more context for some of the emotion shown in their later years as chronicled in the film. It's not much of a gripe, but I wouldn't have been sad if the movie had been expanded by 15 minutes with some more attention to their golden age. The real problem for me in this movie, and I know how petty this is going to sound, is Danny Huston. This is a guy who has been in a ton of films and TV shows over the last 15 or so years. You'll remember him from X-Men Origins Wolverine, as well as Wonder Woman, etc., etc. There are some actors where I just look at their faces and it distracts me to no end. Not really creepy or disturbing, it's just a doppelganger-like quality. And I know exactly what it is. Danny Huston looks to me like a discount Ray Wise, and that drives me to distraction, as I said, because I'm not thinking about whether or not Hal Roach, who most famously brought us both Laurel and Hardy and Our Gang, was a decent guy, an asshole, or what. All I can think of is, man, this guy looks like Ray Wise. And no knocks on Danny Huston. He does a fine job portraying Hal Roach in this movie. But he wasn't in RoboCop, Twin Peaks, and Star Trek The Next Generation. So there's that. But it's this phenomenon of distracting actors. You know who else is like that? Craig T. Nelson, who is essentially a discount Powers Booth. And Wings Hauser. Wings Hauser was the go-to shit villain in every 80s revenge thriller. Though I do admit he was awesome as Ramrod the Killer Pimp in 1982's Vice Squad, a movie which also featured Michael Ensign, by the way, who appeared in the Star Trek The Next Generation episode First Contact. All I can think of is that Wings Hauser is essentially a discount Gary Busey. And as if that wasn't bad enough, he's also a discount David Hasselhoff. It's true. Just look at the 2004 film The Ruining from Troma Studios, who gave us the Toxic Avenger, The Class of Nuke 'Em High, and Surf Nazis Must Die. In The Ruining, Hauser gets mistaken for the Hoff and violently corrects the error. He actually plays a character billed as not Hasselhoff. I'm not kidding about this. And yet, in such cases, I simply cannot look away. It's incredible what a dose of pseudo-familiarity can do to hold your attention. I mentioned earlier that Wild Poses was not the only crossover between Our Gang and Laurel and Hardy. Tommy Bond, who played Butch in the Our Gang shorts, appeared in Laurel and Hardy's 1938 film Blockheads in a cameo. More famously, Darla Hood, Alfalfa's love interest from the Our Gang series, plays the titular character in 1936's The Bohemian Girl. In fact, this particular film is full of such connections. We have Zeffie Tilbury, who played the misunderstood old lady in Our Gang's fabulous Second Childhood from that same year. She would later appear in Blockheads as well, and would go on to portray Grandma Jode in the 1940s classic drama The Grapes of Wrath. We also find Laurel and Hardy regular James Finlayson, often referred to as Jimmy Finn or simply Finn, and who is a constant foil throughout many, many Laurel and Hardy films and shorts. Finlayson crossed over into Our Gang for the short Mush and Milk in 1933, which features one of the funniest exchanges ever with Spanky McFarlane that took place over a telephone.
Hello? Who is this speaking?
I don't know. Can't see you.
Hello. This is Mr. Brown of the First National Bank. Who is this?
Mr. Brown from the First National Bank. That's what you just told me.
What number is this?
How many guesses?
Listen, what is this all about?
I don't know. You started it.
No. Listen here, I want to talk to old Cap.
Well, why didn't you say so?
Another interesting note, Finlayson's protracted was the basis for how Dan Castellaneta originally played Homer Simpson. Told it was too long an expression to work effectively, he abbreviated it to the now iconic Go! The desire to see the icons we love come alive again or be presented in a more intimate form is well understood. It's about reminding us of seeing those persons before, taking us back, if you will, to a familiar and comfortable time and place in our memories. We want our icons to be as we remembered them, untarnished, with the same inviting feeling we remember when watching them. You need performances that can effectively evoke the person you know, inasmuch as we often have never met the real person and have no idea what they were actually like. But there have, of course, been many biopics over the years about various celebrities and performers. We saw Lady Sings the Blues about Billie Holiday, Wired about John Belushi, The Buddy Holly Story, Walk the Line about Johnny Cash, and so many more. True fans know when a production really nails it. And Stan Ollie nails it. As a testament to the greatest comedy duo in history, Stan Ollie tells only a brief story. As a testament to enduring friendship and the ups and downs of relationships at the best and worst of times, it is eminently satisfying. I feel as if it's the next best thing to getting to know them personally. And it's amazing to acknowledge exactly how far into the collective consciousness the works of Laurel and Hardy have entrenched themselves, as evidenced by their seemingly endless influence, and how far that influence reached into our popular culture as well over the years. I've already mentioned the connection through The Simpsons, but consider these examples as well. On the TV show Gilligan's Island from the late 1960s, the relationship between the skipper and Gilligan was very much inspired by Laurel and Hardy, right down to the way the skipper would do a slow burn into the camera. This is a perfectly logical connection, in fact, as Alan Hale Sr. worked with Laurel and Hardy on 1936's Our Relations, and Alan Hale Jr., who played the skipper, actually met Laurel and Hardy on at least one occasion. The duo was also honored in an episode of the sitcom Perfect Strangers, with Bronson Pinchot eventually playing Stan Laurel in the 1999 film The New Adventures of Laurel and Hardy for Love or Mummy. An interesting connection is through Dick Van Dyke. He was an impersonator of Stan Laurel, and along with the author John McCabe, who I mentioned earlier, as well as others, founded the official Laurel and Hardy fan club named the Sons of the Desert after one of their funniest films. Dick Van Dyke even delivered the eulogy at Stan Laurel's funeral, Stan having been very impressed by Van Dyke's comedic style. We could go on. The homages paid to Laurel and Hardy could fill a book. Certainly, Steve Coogan and John C. Reilly breathed incredible life into these departed comic geniuses, and we've been seeing this more and more over the last decade. I personally really enjoyed the Farrelly brothers' The Three Stooges to the point where I desperately wanted to see more films with the spectacular cast. My friend and I, both huge Stooges fans, agreed that this was as close as anyone could get to having the actual Stooges, and it would be awesome to see more films done in the same vein. Another very odd example is the 2018 film Death Kiss, starring a Hungarian actor named Robert Kovacs, who also goes by the name Robert Bronzy, because of course he does, and who is the spitting image of a mid-1970s Charles Bronson. And I'm not even talking close, I'm talking exact, like freakily exact. Now, given that Charles Bronson was often a man of few words in his films, we could probably limit the amount of overdubbing we'd have to do with Mr. Bronzy and make more Bronson movies. The illusion is total. I love Charles Bronson's films, and after all, he was married to the lovely Jill Ireland, who appeared as Layla Kalomi in the Star Trek original series episode This Side of Paradise, the one with Kirk's amazing insult.
You belong in a circus, Spock, not a starship. Right next to the dog-faced boy.
The impact of which apparently causes Spock to transform into a stuntman dressed as Frankenstein's monster. So these examples beg the question, is it possible to recreate and recapture the essence of a thing long past so that it can be enjoyed again through the telling of new stories? It is certainly possible. We do it all the time through the biopics that I've mentioned and the numerous others I haven't. It's really about a suspension of disbelief in that we know the people we're looking at are not the actual people, but we want to, or perhaps need to, believe that they are for the films to be effective. We are bringing our live musical performers back through the use of holograms, and of course there is the ever-present CGI, blurring the lines between reality and computer imagery, and with the recent advent of deepfake technology, even more mind-blowing examples are being readied for our consumption. This of course begs yet another question. If we can recreate, should we? It's a nuanced argument to be sure. On one side, not only does it allow us to receive our selfish wish of more time with our favorite icons, but it also allows a mastery of a medium to show through. Such renditions pay respect to the brilliance of the originals, and ultimately, why shouldn't we if we can create such a seamless experience? On the other hand, there is a certain ghoulish quality to seeing something you know can't be real. One example that caused a bit of a furor was Peter Cushing reprising his role as Grand Moff Tarkin in Rogue One, almost 40 years after originating the character in Star Wars Episode 4, and 22 years after his death. My jaw was on the floor, to be honest, but much of the criticism levied was that his CGI rendition looked deathly. But then again, let's be honest, he looked like that in real life. Cushing was one of those actors who always looked the same for like 50 years. Incidentally, Peter Cushing is directly connected to Laurel and Hardy, having played a role in the absolutely hilarious A Chump at Oxford from 1940. In discussing these digital recreations, let's acknowledge that you don't particularly need the CGI approach if you can find the right actor. Having watched Damian Lewis playing Steve McQueen in 2019's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, it was really uncanny. And I think ultimately, no matter how much grousing we do about propriety, we will always be grateful for the opportunity to have our beloved icons come back to spend some time with us once more. I know I'm grateful, and I want to experience such emotions again and again. Call it comfort, call it selfishness, whatever it is, it feels good. And that's how our idols made us feel in the first place, after all. There's one Laurel and Hardy photograph in particular that I absolutely love, and I found it in another excellent book that I have called The Complete Films of Laurel and Hardy by William K. Everson. On the last page, 223, is my favorite shot of the boys. The two of them are sitting with their legs dangling from a building high above what is no doubt 1930s Los Angeles, overlooking the roads below, taken during the filming of their silent short Liberty in 1929. Their backs are to us, and Ollie has his arm over Stan's shoulder. It's a wonderful picture, and it encapsulates for me what I have always believed their relationship was about: genuine affection, which explains their lifelong friendship. It is this type of sentiment that graces the screen in Stan and Ollie. I loved the movie, and I've added it fondly to my collection. I suspect I'll watch it many times in the coming years. My wife often tells me that she can't understand why I like The Three Stooges, or why I think The Big Lebowski is such a great movie.
Yeah, well, that's just like your opinion, man.
I give the non-PC answer that men the world over give every day. It's just a guy thing. But she never asks me why I like Laurel and Hardy. She gets it. Millions of people do. Millions of people have. Millions of people will. So to Arthur Stanley Jefferson and Oliver Norval Hardy, I say, thank you, gentlemen, for all the entertaining times, all the laughs, and the impact of your amazing, enduring legacy.